high-end Cat 4, 155 mile per hour winds. So we're still just 2 miles per hour away from becoming a Cat 5 yet again. But there are some things that happened to Lee in the last couple of hours that has led to a very slight weakening. It's still a very dangerous storm, but it's very far out in the open Atlantic and not impacting anybody at the moment, which is good news. Here's a close-up look at our infrared satellite imagery. I went back 18 hours to show you a loop here of its evolution. I'm going to wait for it to reload and show you how impressive it looked 18 hours ago here when it had a very well-defined eye. It was stacked vertically, had a very well-defined convective circulation around it, securing that eye. And then notice what happens here as it drifts to the west-northwest. That eye fades away, and its far western eye wall and convection begins to erode a little bit. What do you think happened here? It's got plenty of warm water. It's got overall ideal atmospheric conditions, but there was one variable that was under-modeled, and that was the increase of some southwesterly wind shear. We cheer on the shear in this situation. When you have a beast of a storm, what can stop it from strengthening? Well, land interaction, which would mean people would be impacted. We don't want to see that. But the other thing could be the intrusion of dry air via wind shear kicking on up and pulling in drier air into its circulation, kind of choking it off. That didn't really happen here with the dry air, but we do have the wind shear out of the southwest, forcing it to wobble a little bit. Its posture isn't as good as it was yesterday when it was very well able to take advantage of the environmental conditions and ventilate and really become a heat engine. We've got that southwest shear, and you can really see it here on visible satellite imagery. On the outermost periphery of its circulation, we've got some convection firing up, and notice the tops of those are getting blown off. They almost look like smokestacks. You see that coming in from the southwest, pushing to the north and east. That's that southwesterly shear that is really having an impact here on the western side of Lee at this time. It didn't weaken it much, though. 155 mile per hour winds is nothing to not pay attention to for sure, but it did lead to a pretty big increase in its central pressure with the weakening that happened in the last couple of hours. Still a very large storm, 650 mile diameter here, and as that charges off to the west-northwest, even though the center of it will track well north of the Lesser Antilles, the wind field will still likely impact some of the northern islands there, maybe some tropical storm force wind gusts, but really still dodging a bullet here. So here's the newest updated National Hurricane Center forecast cone. There are some changes to this. Yesterday, when it popped to a Cat 5, 165 mile per hour winds late last night, early this morning, the track did call for further intensification this morning to 180 mile per hour winds. That did not happen because of the wind shear kind of keeping it in check and plateauing its intensity for now. So notice here with the foreseeable future of the forecast intensity, it doesn't really strengthen it much more. It keeps it at a Category 4. That's a change from yesterday where it had a period of time where it would be a Cat 5 once again. Not seeing that now. Still a major hurricane, still a big deal, 155 mile per hour winds right up through tonight and into tomorrow morning. And then also take note here of it slowing down. It's forward motion right now at 13 miles per hour. This period of time from Sunday night to early Monday morning, really from Saturday night, that 24-hour stretch, it's not moving very far as it's almost directly north-northeast of Puerto Rico. So it's going to slow its forward motion down before starting to speed up a little bit and then taking the well-advertised turn to the north here by the middle of next week. Still, at that point in time, a Category 4 hurricane. Now, it's very interesting to also point out that a Category 5 storm, it's very, very hard for a storm to maintain that type of intensity. Everything has to be perfect. And last night, for a period of time, it was, until it wasn't, with the wind shear coming on in. That's all it took to knock it off its pedestal and not be a Cat 5 for a little while, and it's now going to be a Cat 4, at least for the next 5 days in the forecast cone. So it's still got a lot of things in its favor for it to remain a very strong and potent storm. Number one of all this is going to be the warm ocean waters. It's actually got a patch here of even warmer waters about 2.5 days out from its current location here. You can see that's up to around 87 degrees in sea surface temperatures. Right now it's looking at 85, and then past that, still in the mid-80s. As long as you're north of 80 degrees Fahrenheit, you've got that latent heat exchange, and you will have intensification happening. And as we talked about yesterday, that warm water extends down to a depth, and that's important in a situation with an intense tropical system, is it's mixing up the ocean water, something called upwelling, and once you mix it up enough, eventually you pull up cold waters from the depth. But when you've got warm waters, warm deep waters, that isn't so much of an issue with the upwelling. It's continuously upwelling warm water. So not expecting that to really slow it down. How about the computer models? How are they looking today on our Friday afternoon? Well, we still have a large spread, but remarkable consistency here. Consistency is key. These models have not drifted very much on showing a northwards turn, and every single model, whether it be an ensemble or an operational here, is well offshore of the U.S. East Coast. But exact positioning matters. If, say, these far western ones verify, that's only a couple hundred miles off the eastern seaboard. Still will bring impacts to the east coast of the United States. If it tracks farther to the east, you can see in there barely, that is Bermuda. So folks will be impacted by the storm, especially if this tracks just to the west of Bermuda, meaning they'll be on the dirty side of Lee, getting the strongest winds, highest storm surge, highest wave action here. What we'd like to see is just right down the middle here, going up north, moving through that channel between Bermuda and the east coast, bringing minimal impacts to both coasts, both areas. We'll see if that happens, though. It's really going to be where it takes that northwards turn, and there are players on the field here that will determine that. We've been talking about this subtropical ridge, this massive area of high pressure that's been guiding Lee in its lifetime so far due west-northwest. Eventually, that storm, as it gets out to 2.5 days from now, will begin to sense that subtropical ridge not having as much influence on it. It's going to begin to track around the far western periphery of this subtropical ridge, sensing that weakness and drifting to the north. It's going to want to go north a little bit more, but then it's going to run into this trough of low pressure here and the jet stream dip over the eastern seaboard that should keep it in this channel, which is why all of these models are indicating the same thing. What they disagree on is exactly when Lee will sense that weakness in the ridge and take that turn to the north, and when it will feel the influence of this building trough that keeps it farther to the east there. See, there's a lot of variables in play here. That's why confidence in a forecast like this, after 5 days, after like right here, goes down because the model spread is so large. We're looking at about a 400-mile spread here on where the center of Lee may track. That's huge. So we'll watch it carefully, and that's what it's going to take. So how about the GFS and Euro models, the operational? How are they seeing things? Good consistency right up through Tuesday of next week, almost right on top of each other with a storm track. And then notice here, good consistency there in agreement with that turn to the north at almost the same time, taking it well to the west of Bermuda, which is right there, well offshore there, off to the west. And then GFS in the yellow here does keep it as a threat for Atlantic Canada, Nova Scotia here. But the Euro, this is a good outlook to see here, missing Atlantic Canada and staying out at sea. If that was to verify, that would be great. But again, these will change several more times between now and then. All right, history often tells us a lesson of what may happen in situations like this. We look back at historical records for storm analogs. What I did here is I took the current position of Lee and I overlaid all major hurricanes since the 1800s that have passed within 50 miles of that position. See them all overlapping here, and then as I widen out the shot, you can see there's a large difference of solutions here of where storms have tracked. Some have moved far to the south and continued on a westward trajectory and made it into the Gulf of Mexico, but a vast majority of them have taken that recurve off to the north, missing the United States. Have there been outliers? Surely. You can see them here. But this is also depicted by the exact steering mechanism that we just talked about. The far western tracks here were because a big subtropical ridge was much stronger and more broad and farther off to the west. These tracks off to the north here was when that subtropical ridge was farther off to the east and weaker, and it made that recurve sooner, which is what we're thinking will happen with this. So here's again a look at the GFS model. The wind field with this takes it up into the Halifax area, Nova Scotia area by next weekend, Saturday, September 16th. Still bringing impacts to interior New England, Boston area, Cape Cod, seeing some flooding there in Boston Harbor. And then you've got the European model that has it a little bit farther off to the east and offshore by next weekend. And by the way, you may be asking, what is that? That is Margot, which the Euro has coming awfully close. And if you're wondering if they'll become a superstorm, that's not how it works. What it's called here is the Fujiwara effect, and this would be when the stronger of the storms actually does absorb the weaker one, which would be Margot at this point, but they do pivot around each other if in fact that was to play out that way and they get within a certain proximity of one another. That's how it would work. Eventually, the stronger storm will take over the weaker one. That's a long ways out. We'll talk about that. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Even if there's no direct impact on the eastern seaboard, we're talking about winds and wave heights, massive waves, honestly. 20, 25, 30-foot waves here lurking offshore of the mid-Atlantic. Great news for surfers, but we're talking coastal erosion, coastal flooding, and massive rip current risk really for the next week, week and a half before that zips on off into the North Atlantic. All right, we've got Lee out there. We've also got Margot that you saw modeled there on the European, getting awfully close to Lee in the long term. That right now is a tropical storm. Not all that impressive, and the forecast track does increase this to a Cat 1 hurricane, making it the 5th of the season, but again, recurving well before it even gets close to Bermuda, at least for now. That will likely change as well. It all has to do